might occur, particularly to AARP members who might remember the earlier versions of Walter Mitty. Some cases, we have the original, I guess, the Thurber 1939 New Yorker short story. We have Danny Kaye 47 movie. When did you first encounter the story, and what appealed to you about it?
First of all, is everybody here in the AARP? There seem to be some not retired people here. I'm heading for AARP. I'm a couple of years away. I'm excited. They start getting to you early.
The product of...
Yeah, thank you, thanks. Yeah, I know, I got a couple of years. So, yeah, I mean, for me, you know, the short story I'd read as a kid, I'd seen the Danny Kaye movie also as a kid, but I'd gotten sent a script that was a remake of the Danny Kaye movie about 8 or 9 years ago that I didn't want to do as an actor, because I felt like you couldn't really improve upon that. It's a classic musical comedy, and that genre, I think, was done better then than it is now, and doing a remake without music just didn't seem like it would make sense. And then Steve Conrad, who wrote the script, took this other approach to the story that, for me, related a lot more to the original short story. And in terms of the tone and sort of the idea of this, you know, this sort of noble hero inside this regular guy that exists only in his head. And I felt like that was a very relatable thing, and I just love what he did with the script, so that's why I wanted to get on board.
And just, do you have a particular fascination with sort of, I guess, in the way that you read a 1939 short story as a kid, you know, with history, with, you know, I remember reading at one time you were looking at possibly making What Makes Sammy Run into a movie, and obviously you have two parents, AARP members, who, you know, have been doing great work for a long time, and I just wonder where, you know, do you find that you maybe are more responsive to material of you know, earlier origins than other people might be?
Maybe. I mean, you know, maybe it's my age, maybe it's where I come from, or my upbringing, but, you know, I grew up in New York, definitely in a show business family. But I think the great thing about growing up in the city was, you know, we were exposed to a lot of different culture, and, you know, and just the city itself. I mean, just living in New York in the 70s was just such a different experience than it is now. And yeah, I remember, you know, reading Thurber or reading even E.B. White, writers of that era. E.B. White has a short story called "The Second Tree from the Corner," but it reminds me of the MITTY story too. It's about a guy who's riding home on the bus after his psychiatrist appointment, and kind of musing about his life. And there's like a certain tone to those stories to me that's very, like I said, melancholy, kind of emotional, but also recalls a certain era in New York that I love. I love the history of New York. I love the history of movies. I love history of LA. I'm drawn to that. So, you know, I felt like there was an opportunity in this movie to somehow connect with that, even though it was, you know, it's a modern day story. I wanted it to have a certain, somehow, some sort of connection with that feeling.
So, Steve Conrad is somebody that you had, I guess, tried to work on another project with before this one even happened. How did it work out that he was the guy to partner with on this one, and was it something that you always felt was something you'd want to direct, or was there ever, I know, well, let me leave it at that.
Okay. Yeah, well, I had worked with Steve on a script that he wrote that we developed for a while called The Parking Ticket, which is a great script that hasn't been made. That he just came up with this idea of how to, well, it was actually a script that he rewrote. It wasn't his original idea, but he wrote a great version of this story that it's about a guy who gets a parking ticket, decides to fight it, and ends up on death row. That's the one line in that movie. And he has a tone about what he writes, and what, you know, he has humor. But yet is like similar to me, for me, to the Thurber style. There's emotion underneath it, and he really is drawn to the idea of the regular guy and sort of the heroic nature of what, you know, what is inside of people that they don't get to express in everyday life. that we all have. And so I had been wanting to work with him for a long time, and then I read the script. Coincidentally, I hadn't developed it with him, and then we got together and we spent about 9 months, sort of working on drafts, and then slowly sort of worked our way up towards sort of pre-producing the movie as the studio sort of inched towards, possibly saying yes, which so that went on for a while too.
Well, and that leads into the next question, I guess, which is that you have certainly, I mean, this is, next year will mark the 20th anniversary of the first time you directed a movie, Reality Bites. In the interim, we've had Cable Guy, we've had Zoolander, we've had Tropic Thunder. I mean, these are very popular, well-liked, well-received movies, but I don't think any of them you could say were
some of them well-received.
More than others, maybe. But I mean, are these, none of them could have been anywhere near the scale of a project or of an undertaking as this one was, were they?
No, I mean, Tropic Thunder had its own challenges because we were, doing this sort of, pseudo-war movie and that, it had that. But this movie had so many different things within it. And I think, honestly, the biggest challenge for me on this movie was trying to translate what I felt Steve had written on the page, which was for me, a very specific feeling. And ultimately, I've learned it on other movies that, sometimes the bigger stuff, in terms of just logistical challenges, when you're making a movie, even those are the bigger sort of real-life challenges when you're doing it. Those are not necessarily as important in terms of what makes the movie work or doesn't work, or won't work. So that was something I was kind of aware of going into this, and I felt like there were really fun things to do in terms of these sequences and these big, adventure sequences we got to do. But then ultimately, I felt like the biggest challenge was really just being able to have the story, the character story work its way through all that. And that was a challenge, I think, through developing the script, through shooting the movie, and then ultimately through editing, as we tried to figure out the balance of Walter's fantasy life to real life, and how to keep that through line going throughout the movie.
And you surrounded yourself on this project with some pretty terrific and eclectic group of people. For everyone, I guess, from Shirley MacLaine to some guys who I'm sure you had some laughs with, whether it's Adam Scott or Patton Oswalt or certainly Kristen Wiig. And I just wonder, was the casting process, especially with such a large cast, sort of a huge undertaking in and of itself, or did you know, sort of as you developed this with Steve, who you wanted for these parts?
It was some. I think casting is incredibly important in a movie, and any movie. And that process is sort of this, sometimes there's a part that you just go, I know I want it to be this person. And I felt that with a few of the roles in the movie. Sean Penn, Shirley MacLaine, Adam Scott, Kristen. Those were actually all pretty much, the first choice. And the other casting in the movie was interesting for me because I got to work with actors I'd never worked with before and meet actors I hadn't met before. We went to a great casting director named Rachel Tenner, who went to Greenland. She went to Iceland. We eventually went to Iceland together and cast a lot of roles out of Iceland. She went to Denmark. She went all over the place to try to find these, to fill these roles. And that was really fun to just be in a different area, and then to work with people I've worked with before. Patton Oswalt and I have been friends for probably 20 years, and I mean, he's in Zoolander for a second, and we just, we had a long history together. So that was fun. But, to work with Shirley and Sean, these are people who are iconic as actors that we recognize, but in terms of their process and what, the talent that they have, it's pretty amazing to actually get to, interact with them as an actor, to be a director there for them, and I felt really lucky to have that experience.
I think you are obviously very, very closely associated with the comedy genre for well-deserved reasons, but I gathered from other interviews and things that where you've said that a part of you has always sort of been particularly drawn to drama and a desire to, sometimes life just takes you in a certain direction. But with this, I don't, while it's got very funny moments, I think it would certainly qualify as a dramedy, and in many cases it's very serious drama. And so is that something, do you sort of feel a hunger for doing more dramatic things and maybe, not being, in a way, restricted to comedic stuff?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Definitely as a director and as an actor too. But I think just the nature of what we do, being an actor, what you do is much more. The roles you play relate to who you are, to the age you are, to how you look, what you sound like, how your personality. And certain actors are very malleable, and other actors, myself included, I'd say I feel like I'm not. I'm not going to be playing Lincoln in Lincoln 2. But I feel like as a director, I guess what I'm trying to say is as a director, there's so much more, I feel much more freedom in terms of there's just so many different kinds of movies to make that aren't limited by who I am as an actor, so for me personally. So I really look forward to that, and definitely to not directing myself as an actor, too.
And directing versus acting, is it something that do you have at this point in life, a preference of one or the other? Could you ever see yourself focusing entirely on one or the other?
Yeah, I definitely could see myself just directing, for sure. In fact, I feel like that's sort of what will end up happening as the roles dry up. It's all sort of dictated by, I think, the opportunities that are out there and the ones you want to pursue yourself. But for me, I'm very happy. The days that on MITTY, there weren't a lot of days when I wasn't acting and directing. But on Tropic Thunder, like the days that I wasn't acting were my favorite days because I got to just be there and stand behind the monitor and to work with the actors. And there's a camaraderie that happens when you're acting and directing with the other actors and the crew, where you kind of all get together and you say, look, this is going to be a different process. We're going to have to, it's not the traditional director saying action, cut. I'm in there with you guys, and you end up relying on your fellow actors a lot, and other crew too, because you're in it. And I enjoy that part of it too. But ultimately, I think for me, to just be directing would be that's where I'd love to end up.
And just a last question from me before we turn to the audience. Something, as you said earlier, clearly resonated with you about the story and its various incarnations up till now. What do you hope somebody who may not have been acquainted with the earlier versions, who comes to see your film, will come away from it thinking or feeling differently? What is the reason that you kind of chose this story for people?
Well, for me, it was when I read the script, and I read the last paragraph that Steve wrote, which I think he wrote really eloquently in the script. And when Walter looks at sees the magazine cover and he sees this, simple picture of himself doing the work, it moved me. I felt something, and I was hoping that feeling, that hopefully an audience when they see the movie would somehow leave the theater feeling something, feeling something. I don't ever want to dictate, what they should feel, but to me, there was something in this journey that he goes on, to me, that related personally, that I connect with personally, and I would hope that the audience could feel something when they leave.
We'll hear from them right now. So.